Have you ever wondered if there's some kind of hidden blueprint for survival? You know, a secret code that connects everything from giant industries to ancient cultures, a code that decides what makes it and what just fades away? Well, it turns out there is, and today we're going to decode it.
So, let's start with a little puzzle. What on earth could a modern electric car, with its millions of lines of code, possibly have in common with a language that's been spoken in the mountains of North Africa for thousands of years? I know, it sounds random. But the answer is, well, it's way more surprising and a lot more useful than you might think.
The answer, the connection, it all comes down to a universal pattern. This blueprint that all successful systems use to survive, whether they're corporations or cultures. It's a framework for creating value, and I promise you, once you see it, you're going to start seeing it absolutely everywhere.
So what is this powerful blueprint? It's called the value chain. Now, okay, the term might sound a little corporate, right? Strategists use it to map out how a company works. But what we're about to see is that its logic is so fundamental, it applies way beyond the boardroom.
At its heart, the value chain is just a map. It's a way to break down any system into its key activities, to see exactly where and how it creates something valuable. It doesn't matter if that's a product, a service, or even something as abstract as a cultural identity. It's all about how you turn inputs, raw materials, or even just ideas into a valuable final output.
So the value chain starts with what we call primary activities. Think of this as the main assembly line. It all kicks off with logistics, getting your stuff in the door. Then comes production, where you actually make the thing. Next up, marketing and sales, making sure people know your product exists and can actually buy it. And finally, services, everything you do for the customer after the sale. Each step is supposed to add value to the one before it.
But of course, that assembly line can't run on its own. It's held up by the support activities. This is the foundation of the whole operation. This is your company's infrastructure, its management, its human resources, finding and training the right people. It's the technology and R&D that's pushing for new ideas. And it's procurement, sourcing all the parts you need. You need both sides, the primary and the support, working together to create a system that actually works.
So the value chain isn't just some static diagram. It's a tool you use to diagnose what's going on. It forces this moment of intense self-awareness. You have to look at your past, define what you're really about, your métier, which is this great French word for your true craft or expertise. Then you look at your own strengths and weaknesses and size them up against the opportunities and threats out there in the real world. Only then, after all that, do you pick your strategy. It's all about knowing yourself before you make a move.
All right, enough with the theory. Let's see how this blueprint actually plays out in the wild. And we'll start with a huge industry that's being forced to completely rewrite its own blueprint for survival right now, the modern automobile industry.
To really get the scale of the chaos here, just look at this number, 100 million. That is how many lines of software code Porsche estimates are in a single modern connected car. Just to put that in perspective, that is more than 15 times the code in a Boeing 797. The car isn't just a machine anymore, it's a computer on wheels.
And this new reality is forcing a total demolition of the industry's old model. Automakers are shifting from selling a one-time mechanical product to providing ongoing, connected services. They're moving away from a single purchase to things like recurring revenue and subscriptions. And of course, there's the massive pivot from gas engines to electric, all while trying to deal with supply chains that are just completely upended.
So, to survive, these car companies are having to re-engineer every single link in their value chain. Their R&D is pouring billions into batteries and software. Their production lines are being rebuilt around sustainability. Marketing has to stop selling cars and start selling mobility services. And human resources, wow, HR might have the biggest job of all, retraining an entire workforce of mechanical engineers for a completely digital future. No part of the system gets to stay the same.
Okay, so that makes sense for cars. But here's where it gets really interesting. Can we take this same business tool and use it to understand something totally different? Something like a culture. Can an ancient language actually have a value chain for survival?
Let's take a look at the Amazigh people of North Africa and their language, Tamazight.
For a very long time, the common belief was that their culture was purely oral, passed down only through stories and speech. But some amazing new scholarship is showing us a completely different picture.
And look, don't just take my word for it. Listen to what the scholar El-Katir Abulkasim Afule says here. He points out that contrary to popular belief, there have long been actual institutions dedicated to maintaining and spreading a written tradition. This wasn't some accident, it was a strategy. Writing was a technology they used to preserve and strengthen their culture.
And this wasn't some recent thing either. Look at this timeline. It shows a legacy of writing that goes back over 1,000 years. We're talking about a Quran written in their language back in the 8th century, its use as a political tool in the 12th century, and then this flourishing of literature in religious centers, these zawiyas, from the 16th century on. This was a long-term, sustained strategic effort.
And this, right here, this is the light bulb moment. If we map that business value chain onto this cultural history, the parallels are just stunning. The zawiyas, they were the R&D centers, innovating in theology and law. The production, that was the actual writing of texts in poetry. Distribution happened through networks of disciples. Human resources, that was the training of new scribes and scholars. And the infrastructure, it was the great libraries like the one in Tamagroud that preserved all this knowledge. It's a perfect, complete value chain for cultural survival.
And, this obsession with efficiency, it's so deep that it's even baked right into the language itself. This is kind of nerdy, but check this out. Take the schwa vowel. Linguists call it epenthetic. It basically just pops into existence to make words easier to say. But it's also non-Moraic, which means it adds almost zero weight or time to the word. It's the ultimate lean manufacturing tool, right? It does its job using the absolute minimum of resources.
So here's the crucial point. It doesn't matter if you're a German car company or an ancient African culture. The fundamental rules of survival are exactly the same. A system survives and thrives by consciously and strategically managing how it creates and sustains its value.
Modern tech entrepreneurs would totally recognize this pattern. It's straight out of the lean startup. Both of these systems use a build, measure, learn feedback loop. They're looking for validated learning, proof that what they're creating is actually valued by their people. And they know when to pivot to a whole new strategy, like the auto industry is doing, or when to persevere and double down on what works, like those Amazosh scholarly centers did for centuries. It's a universal playbook for survival.
And that brings this whole blueprint right back to you. What's the value chain of your own work, your project, your career, even your community? What are the core activities that create real value, and what are the support systems that are holding it all up? And maybe the most important question of all is, in a world that's always changing, how does that chain need to adapt for you to not just survive, but to really thrive? Now that's a question worth thinking about.